What's up, Rockstars? Today I'm going to tell you all about CMON. They have a financial report out that also talks about their plans for 2023, where they're at, where they're headed. Let's discuss. There's a lot of new information. Now, as far as I'm aware, nobody has covered a company quite like this, and CMON's gracious enough to actually have these financial reports available because they are a traded company with shares and stuff like that, so they have to do a lot of it, which gives us a unique window into this industry, especially one that does both Kickstarter and retail, so we get a little bit of both. So let's see some of the highlights here. Now, just as an FYI, there's like 72 pages plus of this. I think I go all the way down to about page 72, but I'm picking out just the highlights for you. I'll link down to it in the description below. It's publicly available, so feel free to peruse it at your leisure, but this is just kind of the highlight reel for me, stuff I wanted to talk to you guys about that I think you'll be interested in. So I'm just going to kind of go from the top of the page 1 to the last page I made a note on, and we'll just go from there. But there's a lot to discuss between how much money's being made, like how much they're making, profits, future Kickstarter plans. There's a lot. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let's do that. So first things first, this is kind of interesting. It says, despite the volatile global economic landscape and rising prices, the company, so CMON, has continued to deliver strong financial results with revenue of $45 million, growing from $38 million the previous year. And more importantly, profitability has grown 23% year on year. So in other words, between last year and this year alone, profit grew by 23%. So the next time you hear that, like, oh, hey, it's super expensive to do this, and, you know, we're just doing all that, just know they're making more profit than they have before. Like, they are increasing their profit, not just revenue, but profit. They are making more money. Now, how much profit is that? We'll get into that in a little bit. We have a little bit more to go, but I just thought that was very interesting because we hear a lot about the rising costs and all that, and I think a lot of times assume that they're making less profit now than they were and not actually more profit. I know personally from, a little commentary here, I find it very frustrating as a consumer to hear stuff like rising costs and stuff's more expensive and then I'm charged more, and then companies like report record profits. We've seen it with like all the freight companies and all sorts of other companies throughout this whole kind of like COVID pandemic and then going into like recession stuff and all that. Just it's really frustrating to see. I know not all companies are doing that, but it is kind of a sore subject for me personally because I see both headlines, right? Oh man, we're having to charge more. Oh hey, we made way more money than we ever have before, and it just the sour taste in my mouth at least. But anyway, 23% more profit than last. So they made profit last year. They made 23% more profit than they did before. That being said, a profitable company is a good company, right? It means that they're healthy, it means they're thriving, and ideally making awesome games for us. So there's good and bad to everything, right? All right, so moving on from that, we're actually going to jump down to page 5 here. This is called Long-Term Strategies and Outlook. In 2023, we plan to launch new games not only using our own IPs, but also games based on other popular IPs, such as Song of Ice and Fire and God of War. That God of War jumped out on this page to me like none other because they know how to take my money, and it's with those 3 words. If this is based off of like their card game, which is based off of the newer God of War series, this could be huge. If that's the weighted miniature one that Eric Lang alluded to in a Q&A session about a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago at this point, that is awesome. If you didn't know, there was a Q&A and somebody asked, hey, you guys gonna make it like a miniature God of War? Because they announced a card game, and Eric Lang responded with, well, you know us as a company and kind of what we feel about miniatures and stuff, so, you can kind of take a guess, is essentially what he said. That's paraphrasing, but almost also a quote. Like, it was very much a yes, of course.
So the question is, do you see God of War being a larger scale game with?
So we are CMON. You know what kind of games we make. We're here to talk about the card game.
So super stoked for that. And surprised to see Song of Ice and Fire here again. Are they going to make a sequel to the war game that they made? I don't know. I guess we will find out. All right, so following that, let's get into the actual financials here a little bit. This is by sales channel, which is convenient because they break out retail and Kickstarter. They also have a small little mobile games thing here. But for the most part, they have Kickstarter and wholesales. And as you can see, The Kickstarter for this year actually jumped from 46%, so less than half, to 55%, more than half. They actually say earlier that involved 5 different campaigns, which was quite a bit, plus the Marvel Zombies. So obviously a big year for them and bigger than normal. I think it'll probably go back to the 46. This has been pretty 50-50 with Kickstarter being less for years now. I've been looking at these financial reports for at least the last 3 years, and that's pretty typical. Kickstarter's always been less, and often actually it was actually even more less in recent years because of the price increase. They've been making more money there. Obviously, this is again not profit but revenue. So this is full dollars in without costs and stuff like that. But it is interesting to see still just about the 50-50 split, but definitely 55% of Kickstarter is very, very strong. And notice that their total made, right? They went from almost 38 million to over $45 million. Now, some people might think that's smaller than they anticipated. Some people might think that's less than what they anticipated or more than what they anticipated. It depends on what you think as a company. We'll be going over their employees here soon as well, including how much they're getting paid. But suffice it to say, very interesting to see that swap. And as you can see, they are not like fully Kickstarter dependent. However, if Kickstarter was to go away, that would be an issue. That's 55% of their revenue right now as a company. They have some comments on that, and that is interesting. Another interesting bit, and I think this is kind of common for most companies of this size, but they do have some actual borrowing. They do have some like loans and stuff like that. Over here, you can see that throughout the process, they're actually at about 7.5 million thereabout. This is broken down a lot more in detail later. Feel free to dive into that. I'm just going to note that it's there and let you kind of take what you will on that. And again, if you're interested, you can look at more further down towards the end of the financial report. They break down the actual like borrowing structure that they have in much more detail. It takes like a whole page and a half, something like that. So a lot more. But as you see, it's going down. That's good, right? So good to see. All right. Now this might be interesting for you. As of the end of last year, they had 78 employees. So if you're wondering how big they are, it's about 78 employees. That is not the biggest company on Kickstarter. I know years ago, Awakened Realms mentioned their development teams, and that was already really high up there. We know stuff like Archon has a pretty big company. There's quite a few that have a fairly sizable company, some less, some more. This is probably about middle ground, I would say, of the larger half. So obviously there's a whole bunch of indies with a couple of guys, a handful of guys, one guy, stuff like that. But there are quite a few companies on crowdfunding that have quite a bit. Now, again, CMON also has retail as well and a whole lot of like IP stuff and all that kind of stuff. They have 78 employees. Hey, let me know your thoughts. Do you think that's pretty lean? Do you think that's pretty inflated? Be curious to know your thoughts on that, knowing, again, they're split between retail and then also like the Kickstarter and then like web development and stuff like that as well. All right, this is probably the juiciest bit here. So I mentioned the fact that if Kickstarter went south or for some reason they're unable to launch a Kickstarter, they definitely are in a pickle, right? That's over half of the revenue. So what does a company that's making $45 million do when they worry that they might lose access to half of their revenue? This right here. The group has identified alternative internet crowdfunding platforms for game launching in the event the group is unable to continue launching games on Kickstarter. Besides, the group is enhancing its own in-house capability to launch tabletop games on its own website if required. In other words, they're making their own thing. Plan B. This is something I suspected would happen long ago with Hasbro and Awakened Realms kind of making their own and some opening them up like Awakened Realms with GameFound and then some kind of keeping it just theirs like Hasbro Pulse and stuff like that. Obviously, Hasbro is a much larger company, but it kind of makes sense for these companies, some of them, if they're large enough, to kind of do their own thing. We see a lot of more web stores opening up, and what they're talking about is actually being able to launch tabletop games on there. So not just like sell back stock or something like that. Very, very interesting. Also, the wording of being unable to continue launching games on Kickstarter. It can be for a variety of reasons. They have a fair amount outbound. Now, obviously, they kind of deliver fairly good, so they kind of keep a floating number of work in progress as opposed to constantly increasing like something like Lucky Duck Games seems to be doing lately. But with this particularly, they're saying, hey, Kickstarter could say no, or Kickstarter could go down, or for whatever reason, regulations, doesn't matter. For any reason, if we're not able to launch a Kickstarter, we can keep launching games. So, as an FYI, they are not oblivious to the fact that they are definitely reliant on that, and it looks like they're definitely trying to make sure they're not so reliant. Kind of interesting to see. All right, let's talk about profit. So here is kind of a real good breakdown, and you can dive into this a lot. The only thing I'm going to note here is this profit for the year, and you'll see it at 510,000, whereas last year was 421. Again, that's that profit increase there, of course. But it is very interesting to see that because honestly, that's not a lot. Right? I mean, yeah, it's $500,000. That's profits. That's after paying everybody everything, right? That's all the IP. That's all the cost of making the game. That's all of that, right? The gross profit, 18,416,000, right? So like that's the gross, but then the stuff keeps coming out. And so after all said and done, cash in the bank, what do they got? They're at around 510,000, around $500,000. So if you're wondering how much money is in board games, this is kind of an example of this one. Now, I will say that I've spoken with other devs, and there seems to be a very wide range. There are some companies running a much leaner operations that come on, making lots of money, and their profits and how much they're making total in profit is quite good. And there's also the opposite, where they're making a lot of money too, but it's all revenue and barely any profit. It just depends on kind of where you land there. I will say that they have been pretty consistent with here. There's been some odd years, but yeah, definitely an increase. That being said, there's not even $1 million in end of the day profits. So just as an FYI, I thought you might find that a little interesting. Not to be outdone though. One of the reasons that's so low is because obviously you can make money in running board games, right? Board games can be a profitable venture. This is the directors and 5 highest paid individuals at CMON, and as you can see, their executives are making anywhere from $268,000 to $148,000. So for some of you, maybe that seems like a huge amount. For some of you, maybe that doesn't seem like a lot. If so, we should talk more. I want to be your friend. But no, seriously, it's about $683,000 in total for 3 people. Okay, so this is kind of the difference between the decision makers, which are, these guys are really driving the business forward and kind of what they're doing. And then, of course, just the people doing their job, right? So there's definitely a difference there. Now, with those 78 employees, if you take out the actual whole amount that they pay out, so they'll see here that it says for the year ended in December 31st, 2022, it amounted to $3.9 million to pay out. That equals about $50,000 per employee. However, as you can see here, $683,000 went to 3 individuals. So the amount that the average CMON employee is making is extremely less than that, less than $50,000. Do note, of course, that this is a high in like Singapore, People's Republic of China, right? Stuff like that. Like they're not necessarily US based people. There's not a lot of them. So, the prices, if you're from the US, which the majority of you are, or even from the EU, that might seem, different than what cost of living and average expense typically is elsewhere in the world. So I'm no expert on that at all. I'm just noting, so you can kind of maybe do some math, do some research on your own on like what the average, need is to, live a happy, joyous life in Singapore. I have no clue what that is, right? But suffice it to say, $683,000 to 3 people and less than $50,000 as an average for the taking the whole company and just dividing it by employees and how much it costs them. So anyway, that's kind of it. I thought it was a very cool insight into CMON, into a company, and really getting those hard financials that we rarely see as backers because we're not investors who are, beholden to get valid information like this, especially if requested and kind of needed to make a sound business decision. We're just hopeful customers, really. And as such, we normally get none of this. We don't get charts. We don't get data points. We get nothing. Every now and then a game like a company like Shadowborn Games will share a lot of hard numbers with you when they have to ask for more to go ship out Oathsworn. But besides that, especially if everything's going hunky-dory, you hear nothing. You just hope that they're making a good profit. Hopefully they're being able to run a company successfully, live their lives making awesome games for us. That's the ideal. That's a happy world, right? But it was really cool to see a kind of a highlight of that financially. But seeing the fact that they are looking at alternatives to Kickstarter, seeing the fact that they are wanting to launch Song of Ice and Fire and Kickstarter this year in some shape or form, very interesting, very cool to see. And I can't wait to share that as it comes out with you guys later. Guys, thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, of course, leave it in a comment below. If you are curious to see more information on this, again, that's linked down in the description below, right around that like button, the subscribe button, all that kind of stuff. Guys, have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye, guys.